Okay, so let's get into this because it's pretty big. We're looking at a huge piece of federal environmental law, right? 25 years old.
Yeah, the bedrock. The Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, the EPBC Act, from back in 1999 under Howard.
And now the current government wants to basically rewrite it significantly.
It's not just tweaking around the edges. No, this is billed as the biggest shakeup since it began. And they want it done fast, like 3 sitting weeks fast.
3 weeks for a law this fundamental, that seems ambitious.
Ambitious is one word for it. Extremely aggressive, really.
Okay. So our job today, our deep dive, is to figure out what's going on here. Why the rush? What's the political deal-making? And crucially, what are the big policy fights still up in the air?
Exactly. And that timeline you mentioned, it really sets the scene. Minister Murray Watt, he wants this bill introduced and passed before Parliament shuts up shop on November 27th.
Which leaves, what, maybe 12 sitting days
What?
for scrutiny?
Barely. 12 days to debate a law that shapes how basically every major project, think mines, infrastructure, you name it, gets approved or not. It's a lot of pressure.
Huge pressure. So what's driving this mad dash? Is this finally about implementing that big review?
Yeah, the Graeme Samuel review of the EPBC Act. That's the official line.
Yeah.
That review laid bare a lot of problems.
But wasn't there a whole political saga around this already? I seem to remember Anthony Albanese, before the election, shelving reforms.
You remember correctly. It was
Yeah.
quite controversial at the time. So this is the government sort of picking it back up, trying to deliver on that reform agenda.
An agenda based on Samuel finding the old act wasn't really working for anyone, right? Bad for business, bad for the environment.
That's the core finding. Samuel called it slow, costly green tape for developers, but also ineffective at actually stopping environmental decline, a lose-lose, basically.
So the goal is efficiency and protection. Sounds good. But you mentioned the speed. How much detail do we actually have on how they plan to achieve that?
Surprisingly little, considering the stakes. It's quite something. Even the main stakeholder groups, environmental bodies, industry associations, the ones meeting weekly with Minister Watt,
Yeah.
they haven't seen the draft legislation yet. Or at least they hadn't as of our recording.
Seriously. So they're negotiating based on concepts, promises.
Pretty much. It's a high-stakes game of trust, asking people to back the process without seeing the fine print.
Okay, well, what has Minister Watt actually announced? What are the concrete pieces we know about?
2 main things he's flagged publicly. First, introducing these strategic zones. No-go zones, where development is basically banned.
Right.
And go zones where approvals could be sped up significantly.
Okay, zones, like planning designations. How would that work?
Essentially, yeah. A planning tool. The idea is upfront certainty. No-go areas would likely cover really sensitive spots, critical habitats, that sort of thing. Clear red lines.
And the go zones?
They'd be areas already assessed, maybe brownfield sites or places marked for development. The environmental assessment would be done more at a landscape level, supposedly, making project-specific approvals quicker within those zones.
Right, shifting the assessment burden earlier, more broadly. Makes sense for streamlining. What's the second element?
The second big piece is pushing ahead with bilateral agreements. The one-stop shop idea.
Yeah.
Starting with Western Australia.
Letting the states do the assessments using federal standards.
Exactly. WA would use its processes, but apply the new, supposedly stronger federal environmental standards under the revised EPBC Act.
And Western Australia is key because mining.
Mining resources, yeah. WA's economy relies heavily on it, and they've historically pushed back hard against what they see as federal interference in environmental approvals.
And they weren't keen on Labor's original nature-positive talk, were they?
Not at all. They worried it meant more red tape. So getting WA on board with a bilateral agreement is a huge political signal. It shows the government is serious about cooperating with states and, frankly, prioritizing speed, even if it means delegating assessment power.
Okay, so we have zones and state agreements out in the open, but what about the really controversial stuff, the core machinery? What's still hidden?
2 massive things, really. The full text of the National Environmental Standards, these are the actual rules projects have to meet. Hugely important.
The benchmarks for success, basically.
Precisely. For biodiversity, water, species. And the other one, maybe even more politically charged, the exact powers of the new Federal Environment Protection Agency, the EPA.
The EPA. That's bound to be where the fight is.
Absolutely. Its powers are where the political battle lines are being drawn right now.
And speaking of battles, or maybe deals, that 3-week timeline means navigating the Senate. Labor needs votes. either the coalition or the Greens.
That's the crunch. And all the signals, all of them, point towards the government wanting a deal with the coalition.
Why the coalition specifically?
Well, senior labor figures have basically said as much. And partly it's because the opposition leader, Peter Dutton's shadow environment minister, Sussan Ley, Peter Dutton is the opposition leader. Sussan Ley was the minister who actually commissioned the Samuel Review back under Morrison.
Right, so there's a shared history there, a potential starting point for agreement.
Exactly. A bit of institutional buy-in, perhaps.
Yeah.
The government seems to think they can find common ground there, frame it as a pragmatic, necessary reform based on a review the coalition itself started.
Okay, pragmatism. And that brings us to maybe the most significant move politically, the climate trigger decision.
Yes, this is where it gets really telling. Minister Watt explicitly ruled out including a climate trigger in the new laws.
Explain that again. What would the trigger have done?
It was a proposed mechanism that would have forced the decision maker, whether that's the minister or an EPA, to specifically consider a project's climate impact, its greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2, maybe even Scope 3.
As part of the environmental assessment under the EPBC Act.
Correct. A direct link between project approval and climate impact assessment within this specific law.
And that was basically the #1 demand from the Greens and environmental groups, wasn't it?
Absolutely non-negotiable for them. So dropping it is a major, major concession.
What's the government's reasoning? Why ditch it?
Publicly, they argue climate change is handled elsewhere through the safeguard mechanism, other policies. They say putting it in the EPBC Act would just slow everything down, duplicate effort, turn every environmental approval into a massive climate change lawsuit.
Okay, that's the official rationale. But the political effect?
Immediate and obvious. It makes a deal with the coalition far more likely because the coalition was dead set against a climate trigger. But it also completely burns the bridge with the Greens on this bill.
So a calculated trade-off.
Yeah.
Appease the coalition, alienate the Greens.
Precisely. And it gets even more strategic. Watt isn't just hoping the coalition comes along. Reports suggest he's been privately encouraging business groups, miners especially, to actively lobby the coalition to support the legislation.
Wow. So using industry leverage to pressure the opposition into backing the government's bill?
Kind of genius, in a Machiavellian way. It gets the bill passed quickly, and it achieves that industry goal of sidelining the Greens and their climate demands. 2 birds, 1 stone.
It reroutes the whole negotiation, doesn't it? Labor isn't just talking to the coalition. They're using a third-party industry to push the coalition from the outside.
Exactly. A pincer movement, almost. And it seems to be working to some extent.
How so?
Well, the Shadow Environment Minister, Angie Bell, she's publicly noted having, I think, 3 positive meetings with Watt, another one scheduled. That suggests a level of dialogue, of openness that just wasn't there before under Dutton's leadership, at least not publicly.
So a deal looks possible, but you mentioned the EPA powers as the big sticking point. What's the specific disagreement there?
Okay, this is crucial. The coalition and industry groups like the Chamber of Minerals and Energy in WA, they are absolutely insistent. The new federal EPA must only have powers related to compliance and enforcement.
Meaning?
Meaning its job is to check if companies are following the rules after a project is approved. Did they build the fence? Is the water monitoring happening? That stuff. But crucially, not deciding whether the project gets approved in the first place.
They want the approval decision to stay with
the minister, the elected politician.
Why is that distinction so important for them? Accountability.
Accountability and predictability, they'd argue. They see the minister as politically accountable, answerable to Parliament, to the public. They worry an independent EPA making approval decisions could become, quote-unquote, a green judiciary, potentially unpredictable, maybe overly focused on environmental factors without enough weight on economic ones, slowing things down again.
So they want the EPA as a watchdog, not the judge and jury.
That's a good way to put it. The referee checking the rules, not deciding who wins the game initially.
And if Labor agrees to that compliance-only EPA, is that a big shift from where they were before?
Oh, absolutely. Angie Bell herself called it a potential climb-down from what Tanya Plibersek, the previous environment minister, was proposing. That earlier model sounded like it had much stronger decision-making teeth for the EPA.
And the coalition's argument is, we already have state EPAs doing stuff. Why create a powerful federal duplicate?
Yeah, they raised that. 0.7 state and territory EPAs exist. There's As Bell put it, a healthy level of skepticism about adding another powerful federal layer, especially one making project decisions.
Okay, so that's the coalition industry position. Minister decides, EPA enforces. What's the counterview? What are the Greens saying about all this?
Well, as you can imagine, they're seeing red flags everywhere. The Greens environment spokesperson, Sarah Hanson-Young, basically argues that any deal done quickly with the coalition and backed by industry is inherently bad for the environment.
Because the priorities are wrong.
Exactly. She put it very bluntly. I'm paraphrasing slightly. But it was something like, if the miners and the liberals back this, it tells you everything. It's a deal for corporate profits, not for nature or climate.
Strong words.
And she connects this directly to the Rush timeline, doesn't she?
Yes, she argues the speed itself is suspicious, suggesting the minister wants it rammed through the Senate without proper scrutiny, implying that scrutiny would reveal the environmental weaknesses needed to get coalition and industry support.
So the argument is, if it were truly strong on protection, it wouldn't get this cross-party, industry-blessed, fast-tracked passage.
That's the core tension for you, the listener, to grasp. It seems Labor is making a strategic choice. Prioritize speed, streamlined approvals, political cooperation with the coalition.
But sacrificing the climate trigger and potentially watering down the EPA's initial power over the potentially slower, more politically fraught path of stronger federal powers, and holding firm on things like the climate trigger, which would have pleased environmental groups but likely sunk the legislation in the Senate. Efficiency and consensus versus maximal protection, perhaps.
It really is a high-stakes political gamble, all playing out in this incredibly short window. It will shape Australia's environmental landscape for decades.
And you have to remember the context. The Samuel Review did say the status quo wasn't working. Change is needed. The question is always about the nature of that change and the compromises made to achieve it.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key points. We've got this 25-year-old EPBC Act getting a major rewrite.
Driven by the need for efficiency and better environmental outcomes, supposedly.
But on a super tight 3-week deadline.
Oh.
The big political move, ditching the climate trigger to woo the coalition.
Check. And the main battleground now is the power of the new federal EPA. Will it make decisions or just enforce them? The judge versus the referee.
Right. So connecting this all up, the big picture, what's the final thought here?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, what's happening right now, this Rush negotiation, it really sets the direction for Australia's environmental governance. Is it going to be about efficiency, state cooperation, industry consensus, largely following that Samuel Review model? Or is there still room for strong, centralised federal oversight? And maybe the question for you to ponder is this. Can you achieve truly significant, long-lasting environmental protection through a process that relies on such speed, deliberately sidelines key voices, and abandons major environmental demands simply to secure a quick legislative win? Does that kind of victory build the foundation needed for genuine protection?